Hello, everyone, and welcome to HR Options webinar series. My name is Amy Julian, and I'm the Vice President here at HR Options, and I am so happy to be here as your moderator for today's session. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Kathryn Benson and Connie Mallchok, who are going to share key aspects of recruiting that help them be as effective and as efficient as possible, and obviously that's what we're all striving for. But before I pass the mic over to Kathryn and Connie, I want to review the features of our online meeting room so you can best interact with us. You're encouraged to ask any questions that you can think of by submitting them on the Q&A box on the right side of your screen. We're going to get to all the questions at the end of the session. And for those of you looking for continuing education credits, the certificate and the as well as the slide deck for today's presentation are in the resources window in the middle right side of your screen. And today the session is qualified for one global recertification credit, and I know those are highly sought after, so that's great. And lastly, you're going to have an opportunity to complete an evaluation at the end of the session. It's going to pop up after we end. And if you have to leave early, please take a moment to complete the eval before you close out by using the widget at the bottom of the screen. Your feedback as participants is so extremely valuable to us. HR Options offers the webinar series. We do all this because we truly believe in value-added services. We're trying to provide content and information to those people in our network. We offer outsourced HR support services, including recruiting. So let us fill in with the part-time HR support you need to manage your organization. There's a widget at the bottom of the screen for scheduling a call, and I'd love to talk with you. And now to the topic at hand, recruiting best practices. It's so great to be with two of my coworkers from HR Options. Kathryn Benson is our Senior HR Consultant in Ontario, Canada, and Connie Mallchok is one of HR Options' dedicated senior recruiters who's joining us from New York. Thank you both, ladies, for being with us to share your key insights on making the most of our recruiting efforts. So take it away, Kathryn.
Thank you, Amy, and hello, everyone. We're really happy to be presenting to you. And instead of just focusing on recruiting best practices today, we're giving this topic a little spin, and we'll also be talking about cross-border recruiting practices, meaning we'll highlight for you the red flags to consider when recruiting in Canada and how it might differ from the U.S. The majority of recruiting practices are similar between U.S. and Canada, so if we don't specifically mention a difference, you can assume that the process is the same in both countries. And topics we'll talk about today include connecting with the hiring manager and managing expectations, the importance of the job description, reviewing resumes and sourcing candidates effectively and efficiently, and screening, interviewing, and hiring best practices. If you have other areas you're interested in, please let us know via the evaluation form at the end or when you leave the webinar. Or, of course, don't hesitate to reach out to Connie or I directly. So with that, let's get started. So first, let's look at the importance of connecting with the hiring manager and managing expectations on the recruiting process. To do this, you'll want to ensure to define specific parameters with the hiring manager, such as taking time to review the job description with the hiring manager. And on a side note, Connie will get more detailed on what should be included in the job description a little later on. But by reviewing the job description with the hiring manager, you're making sure that you as the recruiter build a solid understanding of what skills and qualifications are needed for the job. For example, don't be timid to bring up any questions you think of, such as, is the job title a fit for the job duties that you're looking at? I had a situation where the hiring manager was located in the U.S. and had chosen the job title of controller for a senior accounting position. I was filling this position in Canada, and after reviewing the job and the more common associated job titles in that specific industry and Canadian region, I ended up updating the job title to Senior Accounting Manager so it would be more appropriate for Canada. And this helped me to recruit more suitable candidates for the specific role they needed. And in this case, I changed the job title on the job description, the job posting, and the candidate actually held this job title when he started the job. However, you can choose to just change the job posting title to attract more candidates, but keep the original job title when the role is filled if that's more appropriate. And of course, make sure to be transparent with the candidate about what job title they'll actually hold when they start if you are going to make some changes. And really my point here is an unclear or misleading job title can lead to many wasted recruiting hours. So think about the job duties as well as the cultural differences depending where you're recruiting when you are trying to set those final parameters with the hiring manager. So when meeting with the hiring manager, also be sure to dig deeply into the culture of the company, division, or department for the role you're filling. So for example, I like to ask the hiring manager, is it a quiet department, or is it a lively and open environment, and one that's better suited to someone who can work with a lot of hustle and bustle around them? Any and all questions along these lines should be asked to give you the best sense of who would be the best fit for the role. Then you can take those answers to your questions and develop additional interview questions to ensure you capture in your screens and interviews if the candidate is a good match. I also like to ask if the hiring manager has any additional interview questions they would like asked as well. They might have a perspective on a question that you didn't think of. If it's a new hiring manager, make sure that they understand the job search processes and procedures. Nothing should come as a surprise. It's always much smoother to work with a hiring manager who's on the same page as you. And however, there's always a twist, also be ready to be flexible. So one example I've had is I had the experience where the hiring manager I was working with decided they wanted to hire one senior account executive for a retail chain, and then later decided they would prefer instead to have two more junior account executives instead of one senior person. And this is, of course, after we had already submitted many candidates. And you know what? These things happen. So being fluid and flexible enough to accommodate these changes is really important. By keeping in touch and asking questions of the hiring manager throughout the process, it'll help you recognize cues from them, which will allow you to shift directions if you need to. So once the job has started and once you've completed your initial meetings with the hiring manager, you'll want to definitely continue to stay in regular contact with them. Provide regular updates, such as how many resumes have come in, and of those, how many look promising, things such as that. A quick email or call to the hiring manager to keep them on top of the search will definitely help you maintain trust with them. And as everyone has probably experienced, more often than not, recruiting is a really time-sensitive task, and many hiring managers wanted the position filled yesterday. So keeping in contact with them with relevant information will boost the hiring manager's confidence that the position will be filled in a timely manner, and will keep the information flow current. Like I said on the last slide, it'll get you ready to change gears if you need to. A good rule of thumb that we use at HR Options is to never let 48 hours go without touching base with the hiring manager. Also, I really recommend seeking feedback on your initial group of highly qualified candidates. You'll want to know if the hiring manager agrees with your assessment as you continue your search. I like to share resumes that I also like to share resumes that I've rejected and the reasons why they were rejected to get buy-off from the hiring manager and to see if the hiring manager is on the same page as me. Seeking this kind of feedback will only help you better define your search as you move forward. And of course, a primary target of your recruiting process is to present a solid but reasonable number of highly qualified candidates for the hiring manager's consideration. Our recommendation is usually between 3 to 5 finalists. You want to give the hiring manager choice without overwhelming them with too many candidates. But if you do have more than, for example, 5 qualified candidates that you really like, set those aside in a secondary group so they're ready to go if you need them. Also, be sure to document all steps so there is transparency if the hiring manager or another party wants to review the job search progress and process. Canada, much like the U.S., has strict human rights legislation, and your recruiting documentation should state clear reasons why certain candidates were not chosen over others that are tied directly to the job requirements. So, not to scare you, but there was a legal case in Canada where a company hired a recruiting firm, not HR Options, by the way, to fill a position, and the recruiter told the candidate that he was not selected because, quote unquote, he was too junior. The candidate sued the company since they had hired the recruiting firm and won $5,000 on the basis of age discrimination. So be very careful about what feedback you're documenting and communicating. If a candidate is too junior for the position, the best way to communicate it is, for example, right now your amount of technical or industry experience does not meet the skill set and background requirements for this position. So on this slide, I'm highlighting the importance of engaging both current employees, if you can, and hiring managers in your recruiting efforts. Here are some tips of how to make this engagement actually happen. So first, use your active listening skills in your initial conversation with the hiring manager, and if you can, with other team members, if you're fortunate enough to be able to get feedback from other team members. Tips for active listening include repeating back what is said to you to ensure you understand what they're saying, and of course not interrupting with another question, but letting the hiring manager or the team member speak before you continue. And like we discussed earlier, review the job description with the hiring manager and, if you can, with another team member, and note any additional skills or requirements or desired qualities that you can add. And again, inquire about the culture of the company and of the team environment. Ask team members about their experience working in the current environment. You'll be really surprised that you might find out some aspects of the job or of the work environment that was not provided by the hiring manager. And once again, ask questions and probe to ensure the job description is as accurate and fair a description of the job as possible. You want to make sure that even information you won't include in the job description but is useful to you is asked for your reference. So, for example, is there any experience a candidate might have that might hinder their ability to be successful on the job? That's one question that I often ask. I was once hiring for a sales position, and the hiring manager requested that the candidate should not have previous experience in the industry because he had had poor experiences with candidates who had learned what he called bad habits from their previous experience in the particular industry. So he preferred to train a candidate with a clean slate, so to speak. So you never know what tips the hiring manager can give you to help you fill the job more easily unless you ask. So some more tips to keep the hiring manager engaged in the process include ask about the hiring manager's communication and management style. This will really help you to develop screen and interview questions tailored to the specific job and to the work environment the candidate will be exposed to if they start the job. Ask follow-up questions to ensure clarity throughout the process. And of course, you guessed it, you'll hear us saying this again and again today. Document everything. So the hiring manager, if they have a question for you, you have a factual answer. Also, explain the importance of receiving the hiring manager's feedback on candidate resumes and interviews. Explain to them that it's helpful for you as a recruiter to hear what their thoughts are, so you can find similar candidates or adjust your search parameters if needed based on the information they give you. To help with ensuring quality feedback, be sure to follow up on candidate submissions for consideration in a timely manner to keep the hiring manager engaged. As soon as I've interviewed a quality candidate, I prepare my notes and I try to submit that candidate right away to the hiring manager to review. I find the less time between communication between you and the hiring manager, the better to keep them engaged and really both of you engaged in the process and to keep it moving forward. Lastly, remember, your ability to establish clear and effective communication with the hiring manager can and will directly impact your efficiency and effectiveness in filling the open position. An unclear flow of information or limited communication with the hiring manager starts your recruiting process off with inadequate or incomplete information, And this lack of communication and information will have a domino effect on the entire recruiting process. So one example I have in terms of unclear communication that I experienced negatively affecting my recruiting process is that I was filling a Canadian finance position where I had asked the hiring manager if the candidate had to be bilingual with French and English. The response from the U.S.-based hiring manager was that it was preferred but not needed. Later, I realized that if I had probed a bit more, it would have been clear that bilingualism was essential and that the hiring manager was just not aware of the cultural need for Québécois French in Quebec. If you're doing business in Quebec and the new hire will be working with Quebecers really outside of the Montreal, which is an English-speaking area, then the French language is not only culturally required, but often legally required as well. Also, it's not enough for a candidate to say they're bilingual. They must be able to show bilingualism in both verbal and written communications. And because Quebec French differs from Parisian or African French, for example, in your job posting, you'll want to list experience in Quebec using Québécois French as a key competency in your job description. And again, Connie is about to get into job descriptions. Also, if you're looking for a bilingual employee to handle Quebec clients, looking within Quebec to fill that position is highly recommended. It's really difficult to find truly bilingual Québécois employees in Canada outside of Quebec. New Brunswick, you might find some in certain regions like the Ottawa region of Ontario, but really Quebec is your best bet if the candidate will be working with Quebec companies. So clarity up front with the hiring manager is key, as well as understanding and being sensitive to cultural differences. So a theme of the webinar so far has been the importance of clear communication. So I'll summarize again on my final slide on this topic. Maintain clear, concise, and consistent correspondence with hiring managers. And if you and the hiring manager aren't communicating, and the hiring manager, for example, selects one candidate out of 3 and you have no idea why they rejected the other 2, it will be very difficult to reject those candidates with any useful information as to why they weren't selected. Also, make sure to ask the same questions of every candidate in your screens and interviews so you can differentiate easily between your A's and A pluses, for example. And this will also help you to avoid discrimination in your hiring practices. On a side note, since we're on the topic of discrimination, a major difference between U.S. and Canada is that drug testing is not allowed in Canada as part of your recruiting and hiring process. There are some rare exceptions, but the general rule is that drug testing is illegal in Canada. Credit or criminal background checks can be done if shown to be relevant to the job. So my next bullet point on this slide is to maintain clear, concise, and consistent correspondence with candidates as well as the hiring manager, since the candidate experience will reflect not just on you, but on your company as well and who you're recruiting for. And always avoid misrepresentation. Honesty and clarity are paramount if you want the candidate to become a new hire who lasts. There should be no surprises when they start the job. And of course, I'll say it again, document everything. And now I'll turn it over to Connie, who's going to talk about job descriptions.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. So there are 3 primary areas of consideration when you're creating a job description. First is primary accountabilities, key competencies, and minimum qualifications and requirements. The primary accountabilities define the daily, weekly, monthly, and annual duties of an individual and that they'll be responsible for and or contribute to during the course of their daily employment. You want to be as specific as possible here on what duties and responsibilities they're going to be performing on a regular basis. And you also want to be a little bit broader and include things that they may touch upon, but things that they may not be, responsibilities they might not be solely responsible for. For example, if there is an annual report that's being produced and they're contributing some data to that report, but yet they're not the one who's responsible for compiling all that data. Key competencies are reflective of the base knowledge and skill set that somebody needs to bring to the job in order to perform the job at a standard level. The key elements of key competencies are definitely touching upon the written and verbal communication of the candidate, their professional knowledge, abilities to work independently or as part of a team, and what kind of technical and analytical skills they need to bring to the table, their organizational and documentation abilities, as well as their level of professionalism, and making a distinction between individuals who will have some additional management responsibilities versus individuals who may be working at an administrative level. You want to highlight initiative skills, problem-solving skills, and reflect whether or not the environment is a fast-paced environment versus a steady-paced environment. And for me, I find that the term fast-paced environment is often overused, and almost every job description says that it's a fast-paced environment. But as a recruiter, I think it's important to know whether or not an environment is actually a fast-paced environment versus one that may have a more steady pace. For example, one of the clients that I work with is an academic institution, and they have a fairly consistent annual cycle. The students start in the fall. There are certain milestones that happen throughout the year. The summertime has more of a focus on preparation for the year, and here there's relative consistency throughout the year. At times, the environment may be fast-paced, but I would never consider this particular job overall or this particular environment a fast-paced environment. Now, if you're at a startup company, you may find that that might be a more actual fast-paced environment where you're finding employees who are wearing multiple hats, who are going from task to task, who might be driven by very tight and strict deadlines. And not to say that those don't exist within the academic institutional environment. They may have less of those deadlines and fewer of them, whereas in a startup environment, there may be 3 or 4 deadlines on a daily basis. And then lastly, in the job description, you will see the minimum qualifications and requirements, which include education, years of experience, industry skills, and any specific technical skills and abilities that an individual is going to need to perform the defined tasks. And here it's really important to consider the years of experience and whether or not those can make up for a lack of education. Some employers are willing to consider candidates with more or less educational experience. And then we will move on to just reinforcing why spending time on creating your job description, why it's worth your time. The job description serves so many purposes. It creates the foundation not only for the hiring manager, but the candidate, the employee, and the job search. So its impact is on multiple levels. And this is why it's so helpful to have a clear, concise job description. It defines the parameters of not only your job search, but also what the candidate will be responsible for once they're hired. For example, if you're conducting a job search and you're looking for a senior account manager, you may end up reviewing candidates who have been sales associates. But candidates with sales associate experience of 1 year or less may not have enough experience to perform all of the job duties required of a senior account manager. When you have the word manager in the job title, there definitely will be managerial duties and responsibilities. And even though a candidate at a sales associate level may be capable of doing a majority of the duties that a senior account manager may be responsible for, they simply may have too little applied experience for certain work environments. Some companies like HR Options tend to hire junior employees because our model is that we train our employees and find somebody who is a cultural fit. Our training usually takes anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks, and depending on the culture of the company and whether or not, what the focus is, that may be something that's appropriate in certain environments. In other cases, you may need an employee who is able to operate at full capacity within the first week. It's important for employees to know their limitations, and the job description provides this. It provides clear boundaries, for not only that employee, but also within their relationship to their coworkers. If someone's hired as a receptionist, it would be inappropriate for him or her to tell a senior marketing analyst what their goals for the day are. But if you flip that, it would definitely be appropriate for a senior marketing analyst to make a request of a receptionist. The job description is definitely the basis for your job posting. Some companies will take their job description verbatim for their job posting, and others will simplify it. From my experience, it's definitely, you get a better response with a simple, clear job posting. And we're going to show you an example on the next slide of a job description. And one thing that you'll notice is that on the job description, there's a short summary of the job, the primary responsibilities, the key competencies, and the minimum qualifications. Some job descriptions might have a longer summary, and as we've stated before, some job descriptions will also not only include minimum qualifications, but also preferred qualifications. So now let's move on to talking about the job posting and how you use your job description as a basis for creating your job posting. So the most effective job postings are clear and concise and organized into easy to read sections. With the short attention span of today's audience, the job posting needs to be a snapshot of the role, whereas the job description can be much lengthier and more descriptive of specific duties and responsibilities. We live in a media tech-driven culture. 10 to 20 years ago, advertisers had 15 to 30 seconds to capture our attention. And today, they have less than 3 seconds to hook our attention. And we have about 3 seconds to hook a candidate's attention. And we want to hook the attention of the best and most qualified candidates. You can also make sure on your job posting to break out any extras that are related to the job. Extras might be like travel, whether or not you are going to be required to travel in that position. And what this does is this allows candidates the opportunity to just weed themselves out if they're not interested in a position that requires travel. So on our next slide, you'll see a sample job posting. And the sample job posting, you'll see that there is a longer summary, which gives a little bit more description of not only the position, but also gives more of a description about the company and some specific aspects of the position, like this particular position will report to a VP of sales. And for some candidates, that might be a very important thing in terms of their career path and what they're considering as their next step. And you'll also see that for the primary responsibilities, the list has been shortened. You'll also see that the key competencies as well as the minimum qualifications, those have been edited down to what are their essentials. So now that we have completed a job description, we have gone through the process of getting our job posted, and now we're ready to get into what the recruiting process and the sourcing process. For myself, we differentiate at HR Options between recruiting as an active open headcount and sourcing as a proactive step where you're creating a pipeline of warm candidates that are interested in being considered for some of your most common, some of the most common positions that you get approved on a consistent or regular basis. So whether or not you recruit or source or do a combination of both definitely is going to depend on your company culture as well as your bandwidth. They're definitely both good processes to be aware of. And consider whether or not which one serves the purposes of your company. So when recruiting for a position and there's an open requisition and your job posting is ready to go and you are ready to commence your search, the next thing that we do at HR Options is create a job with a job number in our applicant tracking system and post the job on various internal or external sites that we deem appropriate for that particular position. There's a variety of applicant tracking systems available, and most companies select one based on their industry, their culture, and their size. So one thing that a job with a job number allows you to do is to have a defined place where you can capture all relevant documentation and information that are specific to that job. Not only can you include the job description, you can include your pay rate, the location, who the hiring manager is, if there's any other additional team members that you need to be in contact with. On our applicant tracking system, we have a tab that's called Job Updates, where anytime we touch one of our clients, whether it's the hiring manager or somebody else on the team or within HR for our client, we document that touch with a quick little note and a note that indicates the date and time that we spoke to them, and also just like a brief 1 or 2 sentences with the topic that we discussed, whether it was the original salary range that was given to us for the position wasn't in line with what we've seen at the market value. So we had to go back and see if we could get an additional $1 or $2 approved on a particular pay rate. And so that information would be included in our Job Updates tab so that if we ever needed to reference that information, we would be able to do so. So the unique job number in your ATS really creates a helpful space to distinguish one sales associate position from another sales associate position, or one marketing position from another marketing position, because you may have different hiring managers or different locations attached to any of those. And next, I'm just going to review quickly some of the places that we use to post in the U.S. So I would say over the last decade, there's definitely been a shift in what has been some of the most popular and most frequently used sites. Definitely about 10 years ago, a lot of employers were using Monster, Hot Jobs, and Career Builder. Those were definitely your go-to sites. And today, we're definitely having the most success with LinkedIn, Craigslist in the San Francisco Bay Area, Indeed, as well as Career Builder. LinkedIn has 3 options for recruiters. You can have a recruiter-only seat where you can actually go in and mine for potential applicants. The second is you can do a job posting option where applicants can apply to your opportunities, and then you can connect with them through LinkedIn. And then the third option is you can do a recruiter and job posting combined options, which allows you to do both of those things, mining for applicants and then having applicants apply directly to you. And Craigslist was founded in San Francisco during the dot-com bubble of the late 90s and early 2000s, and it continues to provide solid candidates in the Bay Area for certain types of positions. My experience with Craigslist and other major U.S. cities is that their job posting platform just doesn't yield such reliable results as the San Francisco Bay Area. So for a lot of the clients that HR Options works with, we're really blessed that we get to continue to utilize Craigslist as a resource. And then as Indeed is another resource that we use, and there's definitely some differences between the way we use Indeed in the U.S. versus the way that we use Indeed in Canada which Kat will definitely highlight in the next slide. So in the U.S., Indeed is definitely a place where we mine for candidates. We tend to not get such a great response when we post jobs on Indeed, because most candidates in the U.S. will just post their resume on Indeed, and you can find candidates because of the way that the algorithms work within Indeed. And now I will pass it back to Kathryn so she can review the resources that are used in Canada.
Thanks, Connie. So common sites used in Canada are somewhat similar to the U.S., such as LinkedIn and Indeed, but like Connie said, there is a difference. And Indeed, it is free in Canada to recruit using Indeed and post a job. And we do find that we have pretty good success using Indeed in Canada. So we use it less as a mining site, which Connie mentioned she does in the U.S., and more as a site where we post jobs to. And we also have big sites like Monster as well as Workopolis, and a site called wowjobs.ca, which charges per click on your job posting. And there are some city-specific sites such as alljobs.ca, which would actually, the actual site for the specific city would be calgaryjobs.ca, for example, that drills down specifically per Canadian city where you can post jobs. And sites such as Jobilico in Canada. Jobilico originated in Quebec, and with this one you become a member and your job posting gets matched to candidates already in their system. And we've had success using Jobilico to fill positions in Quebec, and they have expanded outside of Quebec as well to the rest of Canada. The most successful posting sites in our experience is LinkedIn and Indeed. The large job boards such as Monster or Workopolis tend to be costly, and you'll receive a high volume of candidates, but not necessarily a high volume of qualified candidates. So we tend to not use those sites actually very often at all, if ever. And then unlike in the U.S., which Connie had mentioned, well, she mentioned in the Bay Area that Craigslist is really a great resource for recruiting. In Canada, Craigslist has not yielded good results, so it kind of matches more outside of the Bay Area in the U.S., and that it's not a resource that we use. So there's a lot of free sites such as Kijiji, Craigslist, a whole list of them, and we don't find them valuable at all. So again, if you're recruiting in Canada, hopefully this gives you some idea of some sites that you can turn to that will help. And now I'll turn it back over to Connie.
Thanks, Kathryn. So now you've got your job posted and you're starting to receive applicants. The first point of contact with the applicant will be their resume, and you have to apply a discerning eye to the applicant's resume. One of the things that I do when screening resumes is that I focus on the 3 most recent job positions and whether or not they are a match to the experience and skill set that I'm looking for. Another key factor that I look at is education. I look at whether the candidate has 1 to 2 years of work experience or whether they have 5+ years of work experience. And that helps me to quickly and easily weed out any particular candidates that might be overqualified. So now you've gone through your candidates, or your applicants I should say, because they're still applicants at this point, and selected a group that are going to become your candidates that you've defined are a potential fit for the position. Your next step is going to be scheduling phone screens with those applicants that match the job requirements and to reject candidates that are not a good fit for the position. Some companies require testing or pre-screening questionnaires, but for me, my next step is phone screens. So if I've identified 7 potentially highly qualified candidates for a retail buyer position, my first step is to email those candidates with a summary of the job, as well as gauging their interest and availability for considering the opportunity. I'm also interested in finding out when they might be available for a phone screen. Because believe it or not, sometimes by the time an applicant has applied to a job and the time you took to screen their resume, they may have accepted another job. And for me, doing the first point of contact as an email helps me to be very, very clear about which candidates are actively looking for a job and are most interested in the position. So on this slide, you'll see that there is some sample screening questions. Creating screening questions definitely helps you separate candidates who are qualified versus those who are not. It also can help you identify who are your A candidates, who are your B candidates. And that is something that I think you can, by keeping your screening questions consistent and depending on the reply that you're getting from candidates, you can use your discerning eye to help you identify which candidates you're interested in submitting for consideration to the hiring manager. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit and discuss best practices when you first make contact with candidates, which can be via email or phone. You definitely want to establish a friendly, open, and comfortable line of communication. You also want to state your objectives clearly in your phone screen interview. For example, for me, when I get on my phone screens, one of the first things that I say after I say hello is I say, you know, Sarah, I have about 10 questions that I need to ask you, and once we get through those questions, I'll be happy to answer any of your questions or concerns. And one thing that does for me is that puts me, number one, in the driver's seat of the conversation, and it also lets the candidate know that there's some required questions that I need to go through because there's some required information I need to get from her as a candidate. So definitely want to state your objectives clearly. I find that it really just helps make the phone screen super clear and super concise. You want to ask questions directly. Ask any follow-up questions if you need additional information. For example, if you're recruiting for a buying position and somebody in their response says something along the lines of they haven't had any previous buying experience, but you discovered that they assisted a buyer previously, that may be an appropriate place for you to ask for some additional details. I also think it's really important to offer the candidate the opportunity to address any additional questions or concerns, and also to express your gratitude for their time and consideration of this opportunity. Whether or not the candidate is a fit for the position or not, I think expressing gratitude for their time is just a nice thing to do. So next we're going to just talk about additional best practices during the screening and interviewing process. You definitely want to apply the same criteria for disqualification when you're reviewing resumes. You want to apply the same criteria for disqualification when you're conducting phone screens. Applying all of those criteria in a consistent way will produce results that will provide you with a group of candidates who are highly qualified. And I can't emphasize enough that maintaining consistency in the length of your conversations, in the type of questions that you're asking is really, really important, because then you're getting a similar snapshot of what each candidate's talent, skills, and abilities are. And it's really important not to engage in any kind of idle chit-chat. For example, you don't want to ask a candidate how their weekend was or what they did, or what they did. You don't want to accidentally end up speaking about personal information. You definitely want to keep your phone screens and your interaction with candidates on a professional level. And I will just also re-emphasize what Kathryn spoke about earlier, and that is document everything. It's really important to have that documentation to reference back to, and the reason why we document is for those moments when there is an issue or there is a concern or there is a problem. So moving on to our next slide, which is with regard to candidates who are highly qualified. Candidates who you've defined as highly qualified, or you're in process of phone screening, and as you're in the phone screen, you're determining that this may be a candidate that you want to move forward. It is appropriate to lengthen the amount of time that you spend on each question, because that gives you additional time to gather specific details about the candidate's previous experience. And those additional details may be helpful in the way that you present that particular candidate to the hiring manager. And again, document everything. Now, with candidates that you've rejected, you definitely want to continue to ask the same questions of every candidate. However, you can shorten the length of time that you're spending on each question and be brief regarding any additional information that you provide. And at the end of the screen, you can definitely let candidates know that they'll be contacted if the hiring manager is interested in moving forward. And if it's appropriate for you to provide a timeline for a response, say you'll know whether or not you're being further considered for the position, because I'm expecting feedback from the hiring manager within the next 7 days. If it's appropriate to do that, I think that can be a very helpful thing. And as always, document everything. So now you've completed your phone screens and you're in the process of scheduling additional phone interviews with either yourself or the hiring manager, depending on what your process is. And as Kathryn said earlier, definitely helpful to narrow your field down to 3 to 5 highly qualified candidates. Hiring managers, depending on their familiarity and reference to the recruiting process, some may be overwhelmed by more than 5 candidates. So definitely part of what Kathryn was talking about earlier in having a strong, clear communication with your hiring manager will help you to make sure that you're not overwhelming them with the number of highly qualified candidates that you submit. But for me, as a rule, the first grouping of candidates that I always submit for consideration are between 3 and 5. And then depending on the feedback that I receive in return will help me to figure out if I need to make any adjustments in the way that I'm screening out candidates. And this is just to reiterate that following up with the hiring manager upon completion of the phone screens and phone interviews is really important, because their feedback and how specific it is can really hinder or help your recruiting process. To summarize the 3 most important messages to take away from today's presentation, which is true for both the US and Canada, you want to manage expectations to support an efficient and effective job search. You want to remember that the job description provides the blueprint for your entire recruiting effort, and remembering that consistent hiring practices do produce results. And throughout all these steps, make sure to document everything. And now I will pass it back to Kathryn.
So our last topic today is to review some hiring options if you're a U.S. employer hiring across the border in Canada. So one option is to hire an independent contractor in Canada who by definition is self-employed. So this will remove any tax deduction remittance responsibility from you. This can be a great solution if the worker is truly an independent contractor. However, like in the U.S., if you misclassify the independent contractor and they are an employee, you could be stuck paying all the back taxes as well as penalties, which can be extreme. If your new hire is truly an employee, you can set up your own Canadian entity in Canada. This requires setting up a Canada Revenue Agency business number, as well as setting up workers' compensation in the province the employee will be working in, and of course understanding provincial employment legislation and common law. If this is daunting, a valuable employment option is to use an outsourced or third-party employer, such as HR Options. In cases where you have a project to be done in Canada, or you have a great employee in the U.S. who is moving to Canada that you want to retain, or maybe you just want to test out the Canadian marketplace with a salesperson, but you don't want all the administrative hassles of dealing with the Canadian government, or don't have time to understand legislation, human rights legislation, and human resources processes in Canada, a third-party employer can employ these employees on your behalf. A reputable outsource employer will take the burdens of Canadian employment, payroll, group benefits, group RSP, which is comparable to the 401k in the U.S., and human resources management of employees off of your hands so you can focus on your business. The employee performs work for you, and the outsourced employer handles all aspects of employment from beginning to end. So using an outsourced employer reduces liabilities like independent contractor misclassifications that we talked about and employment legislation errors. And of course, eliminating the potential penalties for HR errors or filing taxes incorrectly. So HR Options can employ Canadians doing work for your U.S. company or U.S. employees coming to work in Canada. We have a location, as you know, through Connie and I in the U.S. and in Canada, which provides third-party employment and HR consulting services. So please be sure to see our service options at hroptions.com. A final staffing option is to secure the applicable work permits in Canada to move or transfer a U.S. employee to Canada. There are inter-office transfer work permits you can apply for, as well as many other work permit categories. Please reach out if you're in this situation and would like more information or are interested in being connected with a Canadian immigration lawyer. If you are considering recruiting and hiring in Canada, hopefully these options give you some insights into the possibilities of employing in Canada. So that concludes today's webinar, and Connie and I thank you so much for joining us. And now I'm going to turn things over to Amy for our question and answer period.
Thank you, Kathryn, and thank you both for sharing your insights with us today. Let's jump into some of the questions that have come in through the presentation. Do you guys recommend including a salary on the job postings?
I can answer for Canada, and then maybe Connie can answer for the U.S. So this is Kathryn speaking. So in Canada, of course it depends on the company and the culture of the company, but we find the majority of the time we don't put a specific salary or specific salary range on the job posting. What we might put is a statement like highly competitive salary, if it is, of course. We don't want to be misleading. Yeah. Or competitive salary is more of a descriptor than an actual salary.
But then you might be getting, the downside is that you might be getting candidates whose expectations are far greater than what the job pays. Can you just speak to that?
Yeah, so when Connie talked about the phone screen, so the initial phone screen that you keep to, 10 minutes on the phone, that's one of the questions we'll go through right away is the salary match, and we'll ask for their salary requirement, like their high end and low end, like Connie talked about. And right away we'll know in the phone screen if it's a match or not a match. And sometimes people, even though we might not be in their range, they might say, you know what, but I'm really interested in this company and I really want to work for them, so let's keep talking. So that gives us a chance to have that conversation.
Okay. And Connie, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I just wanted to add that for most of the clients that we work with, we do include the salary information because one of the clients in particular has a very, very strict budget. And when they set a salary requirement, it is firm. And so one of the ways that we open up that conversation with candidates that make it to the phone screen process is the salary requirements were provided in the job posting.
Yeah. As all of our time is so precious, it's a big question that everyone goes back and forth on. So thank you guys for your insights on that.
Yeah, I'll just add one other thing. It definitely depends on the clients. Like our clients don't want us to put it, and a lot of times it's for competitive reasons. They don't want their competitors to see. So we always take our cues, and for the most part, it's interesting. We don't, and it sounds like your clientele in the U.S. you do. Lots
very true. Yeah, clients that are salary leaders are obviously that's something to promote, and someone who maybe is on the lower quartile would not be as excited. So how do you handle an unresponsive hiring manager And we all deal with that, someone who goes dark on us. It's critical that we find someone for them. We're trying to recruit, but they're just not responsive.
I'll let Connie take that one.
Yeah, I have a few tactics that I apply. One of those is, it's like 2 days of consecutive emails, and if I haven't received responses, then on that second day, I will also make a phone call. And if the lack of contact goes on for a third day, then that's when I may reach out to my HR contact and say, hey, I've submitted some highly qualified candidates to this hiring manager. I haven't been able to get any feedback or support. And that's also, I'll go to HR if I don't have any other contact within that team or that department.
Okay. Hey, there's a follow-up question in that same genre, which is, I've heard that because the job market is hot, now there is a tight candidate pool, that companies can't take very long in their interviewing and evaluation process, or they will lose good candidates. Can you speak to this? What do you feel is an acceptable average time frame?
I definitely can speak to that. I feel like there's a couple variances. There are definitely some hiring managers who will take too long and who will lose, good candidates. But like you said, it's a hot market right now, and so some really great candidates are looking to move from one position to another. So I find that it's really, really easy to find additional highly qualified candidates if one of those candidates is no longer available. But I also let the hiring manager know that we don't have an unlimited time frame, especially if they're really, really excited about a particular candidate. And I'm sorry, I forgot the follow-up, Amy.
What do you feel is an acceptable average time frame? I assume for the process,
Yeah, I feel like that really, really varies so much from job search to job search. Some job searches that I've worked on are the job search is approved and within 3 days it's filled. And other job searches where the position might be a senior buyer or an associate buyer level, that may take a longer period of time. Exactly. So I feel like that varies.
Okay.
From a Canadian perspective, I'm just going to jump in on the making sure that you don't lose good candidates. We hear the job market might be slightly different. I mean, especially compared to the Bay Area, where there are probably a lot of qualified candidates. But depending where we're recruiting in Canada, we don't want to lose those qualified candidates because we're often in the position where there isn't a lot of other good qualified candidates. So that's where we do everything we can, kind of like Connie was saying, to keep in touch with that hiring manager and say, hey, we don't want to lose this person. The pool hasn't been great, so please get back to me and reach out to another contact if we need to. And we also are very much in contact with the candidate all the time, saying we're interested in you, we want the hiring manager to meet with you. If something changes and you have another opportunity, please let us know and give us an opportunity to get you in front of the hiring manager. So we're working very hard to keep in touch with the hiring manager and the candidate to not lose that candidate. So that's just a little different, especially, I mean, in the Toronto area, we might be okay, but Canada can be very sparse in a lot of our communities, so
very
we really
good
need to
tips
hang
on keeping things moving and forward. The next question is, have either of you seen any video job postings? I would think for the millennials that video postings would be attractive.
I have not seen any video job postings, but one thing that I've discovered about millennials is they are a text culture. I reached out to a friend of mine who's a millennial the other day, and I left her a voicemail, and she responded via text. Can we do this over text? So for me, I feel like the video texting, I feel like, is the next generation, and then video will be the evolution after that. But for me, primarily, and there's even been a few candidates that I've done my initial contact with via text. So I definitely think we have that coming down the pipeline before we have the video coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, and I'm the same. In Canada, we haven't seen the video. We've heard a lot of talk about video interviewing and that kind of coming through the pipeline. But yeah, I'm on the same page as Connie as
yeah,
Connie on.
I could see a 30-second video job posting page being very attractive. So $1 million idea for anyone.
Yeah,
someone's probably working on it already. Google.
Yep.
At Alphabet, they're working on it. So, which applicant tracking software do you like best?
Oh. Well,
for me,
our options. What would you go
for me, I would say my favorite applicant tracking system is iCIMS. I've worked in a couple, and I feel like iCIMS is the most intuitive and is most responsive and reflective to the way that I recruit.
Great.
Yeah, and I really enjoy using iCIMS as well. So yeah, it's probably a difficult one. We might be a little bit biased because that's what we use.
Okay.
So yeah.
Fair enough.
And we like it.
Ladies.
And we like it.
Yeah. We are out of time for today. I want to thank you both, Kathryn and Connie, for being our presenters today.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening.
I also want to thank all of you participants for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you online at future webinars and hope you have a great day. If you, as you close out, you should be getting our evaluation, and we would love your feedback. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.